there's been a huge acceleration in the number of border walls and fences, especially accelerating since 2010.
I would say the walls are a symptom of a system of global inequality.
This is not humanitarian.
We have no idea who they are and where they come from.
The processes of globalization that appear to be bringing things together will obviously also produce these dynamics that will drive things apart.
It's an identity crisis. Who are we in a world that we cannot control?
In a world that's more interconnected than ever, through trade, technology, and treaties, border walls are emerging as a 21st century solution to societal anxieties. Not just in the US, but across the world. Just a few decades ago, walls were a symbol of divisiveness and authoritarian rule. When the Berlin Wall fell, there were less than 12 border walls worldwide. Today, there are more than 70.
How do you measure such an astonishing moment in history? The East German government said tonight they were going to make more openings in the wall, at least a dozen more, put bulldozers right through the wall so that more people could cross to the west.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The Berlin Wall had been instrumentalized by those US presidents saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. The very idea of the wall was something that belonged to the USSR, that was the enemy.
The Freedom Bell in West Berlin tolls in sympathy for East Germans on the first anniversary of the Wall of Shame.
So for a long time, there was an inacceptability of the border wall. But then with 9/11 and then the Bush and now Trump, that discourse of the Cold War has disappeared. Now a border wall is actually pretty, acceptable.
In his quest to take these riches for himself, Genghis Khan faced one huge problem. Standing between him and the conquest of the city was a wall.
Historically, walls were erected along borders to protect against invaders from neighboring lands.
Walls, I think now, as in history, they can have a defensive use. They usually do. But the primary meaning of walls has always been ideological, and I think also a way of consolidating authority.
It took 6 years and 15,000 men, but when it was finished, it was the ultimate statement of Roman power.
The Romans, when they built Hadrian's Wall, they were very clear about this. They had an ideological purpose. I mean, the Great Wall of China, I think, was only incidentally and sporadically a defensive device, but it's been a very powerful cultural, political, and I suppose in some ways psychological symbol for a long time now, well over 2,000 years.
In our current age of aerial combat, most walls aren't built to protect against foreign military invasion. Preventing terrorism and immigration are the main justifications governments around the world use to build border walls. Others include preventing smuggling, drug trafficking, and territorial disputes. By some estimates, 6 in 10 people living today reside in a country with walls on its borders.
This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is
What I've argued is that in the aftermath of September 11th in the US and the idea that these attacks could take place, that terrorism could occur anywhere, kind of changed the calculus on that for a lot of politicians. And it suddenly became much more okay to build these walls that would have had much a stigma in the decade after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
And you can see the two towers, a huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge huge structures collapsing have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger.
Our assumption was, oh, 9/11 was the trigger. And when we looked at the graph, we said, okay, we got that all wrong. It was the accelerator, but there was something before that. Like the trend goes up before 9/11. It's globalization.
Wealthy countries around the world have bolstered their border defenses in the face of record migrant flows.
The world is as connected as it's ever been in terms of flows of capital, in terms of consumer goods moving around the world, in terms of wealthy people able to move around the world. But at the same time, we've seen in this era of globalization the closing down of movement for the poor. They've become a powerful political symbol of restricting immigration into many wealthy countries around the world.
The budget for the EU's border security agency Frontex has increased by more than 12,000% since 2005. More than 10 EU member states have spent more than $1 billion on land walls.
We've never been so much in touch with the other end of the world, but that's the problem. We see too much, we know too much, we fear too much. And instead of, opening your door and seeing people and say, come in, we'll give you a hand, we see those waves of people and we're told all the time, they're coming.
I think the word anxiety is very well chosen. Anxiety sort of has this meaning of, I'm not sure what it is, but I know I'm worried about it. It's vague. There is something at or beyond the border that is likely to penetrate and threaten something that I hold dear. My political position, the racial makeup of my community, the wages that I can earn in a relatively low-skilled job, etc., etc.
A lot of what walls may be intended to do tends to be the opposite of what they actually accomplish in terms of making people feel more secure.
And I hope he builds that wall. I hope he gets the money. We need it. We need a wall right here. This ain't a game. This is America.
Because when people see a wall, they think there's something dangerous on the other side. Which is really interesting. It's the same kind of reaction I have when I see police cars on the block. I think, oh, something bad is happening. I don't think, oh, I'm so safe because there are police cars on the block. I think there must be a reason for it. And that seems to be what our experimental subjects infer as well, is that if there's a wall there, there's something dangerous going on.
And we need the wall, and we will build the wall.
Trump has made it mainstream. It's possible, normal, not a problem, an easy solution.
It's the visibility of the wall. It's a great photo op. It is, it's a symbol. It is also, like in the United States, it's so easy to chant about walls, USA, build the wall.
There are border walls almost everywhere if we talk about physical border walls. And indeed, if you take the Middle East into account, then it makes for the Asia is the biggest builder.
In Israel, the world's most walled state, its half-dozen structures are primarily geared at preventing attacks, while controlling Palestinians living under its military occupation.
Israel is one of the countries that is really literally fencing itself in. So does Saudi Arabia and India.
India has one of the longest border walls in the world, along Bangladesh. Its aim is to keep migrants from its eastern neighbor out.
It's often Hindu nationalism in India that is worried about the arrival of Muslims from a country like Bangladesh. And so the porous border with Bangladesh was seen as a threat that needed to be securitized and really brought into being by building the wall there.
Actually, China is fencing, as we speak, its border with Myanmar. You will find some in Africa, between Kenya and Somalia, for instance, or South Africa has a few. We see a lot of them now in Europe. And as the Russian threat is coming back, Finland has announced a big public work along its border to renovate their somewhat old fence.
I did work on the ground in India and Bangladesh, Israel, Palestine, and at the US-Mexico border. In all three of those places, what I found was that people who lived near the border lines tended to have pretty close connections with people who lived on the other side. In each place, people told stories of a past era when they would cross the border for just mundane purposes. They'd lived by a dividing line on a map for a long period of time, but it hadn't really affected their daily lives until the wall goes up. They can't see the people on the other side. They can't talk to them. They can't have those face-to-face interactions. My sense was that the walls did kind of produce the difference that they were meant to represent in the first place.
Most border walls are a boon to the security and construction industries. That's because beyond a physical wall with stone foundations, posts, concrete panels, and razor wire, there are also cameras, heat sensors, movement detectors, drones, patrol personnel, dogs, and even robots. All part of a booming global border and surveillance industry predicted to grow to a total value of more than $100 billion by 2025. And while their symbolic value is clear, are border walls worth the expense to build, to guard, and to maintain?
I think scale is almost everything, right? When we are talking about these walls, small projects in small places maybe can have big effects, but big walls in big places have virtually no effect.
So are they effective with respect to migration? Probably to some of it. While creating sort of a sense, even a greater sense of desperation for some people who really do want and need to move.
How difficult was the journey?
It's very bad.
How old are your children?
2 and 4.
Whether border walls are successful depends on what they are claiming to do. If your main purpose is to prevent the movement of people across a border, walls are not successful at all, because most borders are quite long, and the types of barriers that are built are relatively easy to get across in seconds or at the most minutes.
The cost of Donald Trump's wall along the US-Mexico border has been estimated between $20 and $45 million per kilometer to build, and more than $400 million a year overall to maintain.
Really, a wall is only as good as the number of guards that are there.
But border walls have another cost, a human toll.
Whereas there might have been a sort of a clear and reasonable way to cross the border, the presence of a wall or a fence drives them further into more dangerous areas typically.
Since 2014, the Missing Migrants Project has recorded the number of people worldwide who die or are killed in the process of migrating. Nearly 50,000 deaths have been accounted for. And as you can see, the central Mediterranean route is overwhelmingly the deadliest.
If we look at what one of the consequences in the future is going to be, is if we see a lot more walls go up and a lot more border security, and we're also going to see a lot more migrant deaths in the future.
I think we're only at the beginning of this reaction against globalization. These trends in nativism in particular are going to relate to increasing issues over water, but also, just space. As the seas rise, land is disappearing.
According to one analysis, some of the world's biggest emitters of greenhouse gases are spending, on average, 2.3 times more on arming their borders than they are on financing action to reverse climate change. It's an indication that as climate change, conflict, and global inequality drive more people from their homes, border walls will continue to be built around the world for decades to come.
There is one picture you may want to show. It's a picture taken by a Portuguese photographer. People are golfing. Those are Spanish people because we're in Spanish Manila. And you've got those people from, obviously, black people coming from sub-Saharan Africa. To me, that picture is the most emblematic of what we're seeing. We are choosing who we want to keep, who we want to leave on the other side. And the border wall is convenient because once it's there, you don't see what's on the other side. Very convenient.